Hey everyone, I'm the FanFic Critic. I read it, you listen. You're probably wondering why I'm a little out of the weather. Well, part of it was from reading Sweet Apple Pie Massacre and almost completely losing my mind. And another part of it is recovering from being shot several times with the phase pistol, courtesy of Susan. Yeah. I supposedly was in a coma, or Susan thought I was in a coma. It was just a deal that I didn't wake up from the phase pistol like I normally did, so Susan jumped to conclusions and thought I was in a coma. And she decided to have XArcangelAssassin come and try to help, which kind of doesn't make any sense because I thought that Susan hated her, but whatever. So they tried singing to get me to wake up. Okay, don't ask why. And then XArcangelAssassin started to play that stupid I'm a dwarf and I'm digging a hole song, and she started playing it as I was coming out of it. So I went to attack Liz for playing it, Liz's XArcangelAssassin. Susan decided, oh, I'm going to shoot the FanFic Critic several times with a phase pistol to get it to stop, instead of just trying to restrain me, so yeah. So I'm kind of sore. Enough about that, though. Let's take a look at today's fanfic. Olivia's Pep Talk, a great mouse detective fanfic by Brinatello, or Brinatello, or whatever. I'm probably not saying it right, and I apologize. The fanfic is rated K, it's drama friendship, and it has 7 reviews. Well, at least we won't want to worry about any sex scenes in this, or any, mutilations or massacres. Just a pep talk. Let's get started. Author's note, this is a one-shot of a scene that could have happened in the Great Mouse Detective film. It was inspired from concept art by Disney artist Vance Gary, as well as Miles Valdel's Dating the Disney Film, an essay about the film's event in chronological order. The Great Mouse Detective and its characters is copyright Eve Titus / Disney. It had been several hours since the young mouse, Olivia Flaversham, witnessed a scene no child should ever have to face, the abduction of her beloved father. The scene played out so vividly in her mind. It was as if it were happening all over again. She was placed in a cupboard for safety, but that did not stop her from watching the horror of the unexpected attack. Her father was viciously thrown to the ground, bound and gagged by a fierce peg-legged bat, and finally dragged out into the cold, dark night. The scene repeated itself over, each time more in slower motion. Her father's eyes were wide with terror, and his shouts for help deafened her ears. With a gasp, Miss Flaversham sat up and blinked wildly to her surroundings. She was alone in a dark bedroom with no sign of life around her. Looking down, she could see that she was fully clothed, with her shoes resting at the foot of the bed. Suddenly, it came back to her. She was at the home of the famous detective of all mousedom, Basil of Baker Street. What kind mouse, Mr. Dawson, brought her here to investigate the kidnapping of her father? The night grew late, and she was sent to rest in one of the spare bedrooms. The detective was still not agreeable to taking her case. What more could she do to convince him? Miss Flaversham slowly climbed down from the bed, applied her shoes, and tiptoed out into the main sitting room. The room was very quiet, with only the light of the fire from the fireplace. The wood crackled softly, with the soft flames causing a display of dancing shadows on the wall. The room appeared empty as Miss Flaversham entered further to have a look around. The green chair was unoccupied, and it seemed it would be the same for the red chair. She moved closer to look around to the front of it. Pausing at the back of the red chair, she noticed a trail of smoke lifting upward. Another wave of smoke followed as she peered her neck around the small table to see who was sitting in the chair. It was the detective, eyes closed and smoking quietly on his pipe. His position, however, was nothing like she had ever seen before. He was sitting upside down with his shoes resting against the back of the chair, every so often puffing out a trail of smoke into the air. Finding the courage to speak up, Miss Flaversham finally addressed him. Mr. Basil. I am extraordinarily busy, if you don't mind. He snapped without opening his eyes, and yes, I'm mangling the voices. Please get over it. But But you're just sitting there. It is expected of you to see the plan obvious. Oh, I'm sorry, let me reread that. It is expected of you to see the plain obvious. To you, I am just sitting here, but that is not all I am doing. Inhaling on his pipe, he sighed the smoke out leisurely. I am thinking. Miss Flavisham nodded and remained silent for a brief moment. Okay, let me I'm sorry, let's do that again. It is expected of you to see the plain obvious. To you, I am just sitting here, but that is not all I am doing. Inhaling on his pipe, he sighed the smoke out leisurely. I am thinking. Miss Flavisham nodded and remained silent for a brief moment. Inhaling on the pipe again, he asked, Is it a bit early to rise, is it not? Bowing her head, Miss Flavisham whispered, Yes, but I couldn't sleep. Basil's eyes flickered open, and he frowned to her from an upside-down view. Moving to the footrest, she sat down upon it and continued, I mean, the room was nice, and I appreciate you and Mrs. Judson allowing me to stay here for the night, but I started to think about, no need to explain yourself, my dear, he softly interrupted. After what you've witnessed, troubled visions haunting your subconscious is not uncommon. Yes, she nodded, feeling a little embarrassed to reply. It was a bit of a nightmare. But of course. Basil said as he started to sit more properly in the chair. It was a nightmare of your father's abduction, no doubt. He received a second nod. Yes, it was. You see, it was my birthday yesterday. Daddy was going to give me my present. And then that Pat came and took him away. She looked up to watch the detective lean forward in his chair with gathered hands. By then his expression had changed from irritation to mild sympathy. He ruined everything. Indeed he did. Basil nodded solemnly. What was his name again? Fidget. He replied with a hint of resentment in his tone. Yes, I would say he is definitely the one, and the same who works for Professor Rattigan. A rather nasty fiend who would do whatever the no-good sewer rat asks him to do. The kidnapping of a toy maker does seem very odd. In fact, it is a scheme I am still trying to come to a sort of reasoning. Pausing, he looked down to see her eyes filling with tears. Clearing his throat, he added, Perhaps your father's skills are more advanced than the average toy maker, thus leading to another plot much bigger and more dangerous consequences. I don't know, Miss Flavisham cried, lowering her face into her palms. I just want my daddy back. Basil rolled his eyes and shook his head to her sudden wave of sorrow. A few seconds of silence passed before he rose to his feet and stood alongside her, bending slightly to tap her shoulder. Yes, I know you do, my dear, and I suppose that, well, since this case of yours does in fact involve my nemesis, I might just consider taking it. Miss Flavisham sniffed and lifted her head up to him. Really? Will you take the case for me? Well, At that moment, the clock on the mantel began to chime 3 times. Oh, the witching hour is already upon us. Basil looked over to the clock, then back to her with an expression of gentle sternness. It is also an hour where young children such as yourself really ought to be in bed. But my case can be further discussed at a later time, all right? Basil once more placed a hand to her shoulder to lightly push her off the footrest. Miss Flavisham obeyed with a nod and started to walk away towards the door. Basil caught a wounded gaze and tried to think of something positive to say to end their conversation. Oh, and, by the way, she turned to him and he replied, Happy birthday, Miss Flavisham. How did he say? Oh, sorry. He kept on, the running gag for the movie was that he kept on saying it wrong, so let me reread that. Happy birthday, Miss Flamersham. It's Flavisham. She pouted, yet she could not help but smile to the flub. Basil shrugged and turned to face the hearth. Whatever. Thank you, Mr. Basil, Miss Flavisham said, receiving a mere nod in return. Good night. He replied without looking. Hearing the door closed, he heavily sighed. I must take this case. If not for her, then most definitely for myself to conquer Ratigan once and for all. That's the end of the story. And I do apologize for the really bad voice acting. I know I did not do Basil justice at all, but then again, I haven't seen the movie in ages. I really did like the story, but the title just does not match what happened in the story. Olivia's pep talk, it just doesn't really match what exactly happened in the story. You know what I mean? I think the title could have been better, but overall, the story was very good. I didn't notice any flubs at all with the grammar. I mean, this was written beautifully. And I could see this as an extended scene in the movie. I really could. It was a good story. And it was very refreshing to read a good story after having to read that monstrosity known as Sweet Apple Pie Massacre. Well, I'm the FanFic Critic. I read it. You listen. Fade to black.